When I was 7 years old, I remember my father asking me what my fears were, and I had two specific answers. The first were biological weapons, because I had watched the Andromeda Strain one too many times. And second, and clearly the more rational fear, were cockroaches. I thought I had quelled the second of these fears a long time ago until last December, when Joey Franklin published House Guest, an essay about cockroaches that had infiltrated his new home. In reading this essay, I was reunited with the anxieties that plagued me as a child. While confronting your fears may seem like a negative consequence of encountering Joey's work, to me it highlighted exactly what makes his writing so provocative: its ability to relate to your own life experience and help you explore what can be gleaned from those encounters. Oscar Wilde, whose aesthetic theories on art both Joey and I are enthusiastic about, stated, "Life imitates art far more than art imitates life." Yet when you read Joey's work, you find that he successfully navigates both constructs. Whether considering sculpture, his minimum wage job at Wendy's, and I should add that he has now found alternative employment, or the emotional anatomy of a kiss, I find that Joey surprises me with fresh considerations of what we often take to be ordinary. When you meet Joey, you will find a glittering conversationalist. He's easy to engage with, is eager to listen and respond. You always feel at ease in the discussion, whether it be about nonfiction, publication, the intricacies of academia, or, as I have most recently discovered, his qualms about video games on early childhood development. However, upon closer association, you learn that Joey's gift of communicating with others translates to his work. You start his essays immediately positioned as an equal participant in the conversation and feel as if the voice of the narrator is one that you've heard before, one that you know, and one that you want to talk to. This makes Joey's work accessible, entertaining, and enjoyable. However, that same sincerity also introduces you to poignant insights about his subject matter. His honesty in the more difficult moments of his life strike you with a sensation of exposure. His explorations in the essay remind you that art is not only explosive, but simultaneously tender, and life even more so. Joey once asked, "How do we take what nature has given us and move beyond it, not with an arrogant disregard for what actually happened, but with a humble willingness to let the essay uncover what actually matters?" Joey's work is constantly treating this question, and you will find its answers all over his writing. Whether it be in the physical form of a cockroach, thank you, Joey, or in the more intricate parts of our private lives concerning home, relationships, and children, the reader is provided each time with what a successful essay aims to do: explore the divide that creates gaps in our understanding. Joey's question on how to focus on what really matters finds a conclusion after his own consideration on the essay. Any responsibility we have to nature, whether in life or art, is first a responsibility to ourselves. Joey has upcoming or recently published work in Poets and Writers, The Ninth Letter, and the Gettysburg Review. His first collection of essays, released just 3 weeks ago, is entitled "My Wife Wants You to Know I'm Happily Married." Please join me in welcoming respected essayist, friend, and colleague, Joey Franklin.
Thank you all for being here. I am delighted to read again at BYU and to see my students in the audience. I'll just let everyone know they're not getting extra credit for being here. So this is not me patting the audience with grade grubbing students. They're all here because they want to be, right? Yeah. I am going to read 2 short essays from my new collection, My Wife Wants to Know I'm Happily Married, and show off my t-shirt. I made one. I won't read the essay about this t-shirt, but I'll just tell you briefly the story. I've been married for 13 years, and for 12 of those, all of them, I've been a student. And after Melissa graduated and I started going to school on my own, every fall semester she'd sort of jokingly say, "Do you want me to make a shirt that says, just so it's clear, my wife wants you to know I'm happily married," so I could wear it to class, and then if any classmate or student wanted to hit on me, then I'd be safe because I'd have the t-shirt. I've never been hit on by a colleague or a classmate or a student ever, so the t-shirt wasn't necessary. But it made for a great book title and now t-shirt, and if you will be taking orders if you want to get one for your significant other. But I want to read 2 short essays. The first one is about an airplane ride that I took from Las Vegas to LA. And we'll just get started there, and then I'll talk about my balding. All right. Little more than strangers. McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's 6:15 on a Sunday morning, and the slots are ringing in the background as a few dozen passengers slouch in their seats waiting for their flights. I sit holding my bag in my lap, taking mental note of my wallet, my passport, boarding pass, and cash. I check the lid of my water bottle, curl my toes inside my shoes, and shift my weight in my seat. The terminal is quiet. If not for the slot machines in the background, we could be in a library, a hospital, waiting room, or maybe a funeral home. Several more passengers arrive in the terminal, but the seat next to me remains empty until a smartly dressed woman in a gray pantsuit and silver hoop earrings wheels her luggage into the sitting area and collapses at my side. Her hair is a sculpture, with precise black curls tucked neatly behind her ears. She is on business, I think. Sales, maybe, or consulting. And I can't imagine how early she must have woken up this morning for her hair to look that good. Remember, it's 6 a.m. and her hair is immaculate. I say hello, and her lips flinch in a non-committal smile. She says hi under her breath and turns away, rests her immaculate head on top of her purse, and appears to fall asleep. The sound of slot machines still ring in the air, and I have the sudden urge to write down a note about this woman sitting next to me and the impossibility of her perfect hair. So I get up to look for a pen. I've cultivated a good habit of jotting down notes when thoughts come to me, but not such a good habit of keeping pens around. And every time I find myself in want of one, I remember Brian Doyle, who said that a writer always carries 2 pens, a prime pen and a backup pen in case of emergencies. And then I think about a writer friend of mine who always carries 2 pens, blue Papermate Wright Brothers, along with a folded sheet of paper in his back pocket. I even started the day with a pen that I'd taken from my parents' house, but it disappeared somewhere between the car and the terminal. Still, I feel that writerly urge to jot down a note about this woman, and if I want to take a note, I've got to find a pen. The gift shop at the airport, it turns out, does not sell pens. I can buy a Kit Kat, a Coke, or an I Love Vegas t-shirt, but I cannot buy a pen. I figure the clerk might have one she can spare, so I linger a moment looking puzzled after she's explained her lack of pens, hoping she will open her drawer and offer me one. But she turns away as soon as she's answered my question, and I'm left to walk back through the gift shop past the mugs and folders, sweaters, and rows of magazines. Out in the terminal hallway, a woman in Southwest Airlines polo stands at a kiosk advertising credit cards. From this woman, I learn all about the risk-free, no-obligation card and the free flight and bonus points I can get for signing up, and how I have to sign up today if I want the free flights. She doesn't know I'm only talking to her because I need a pen, and she has at least 3 at her kiosk, and I know she's only talking to me because she wants me to buy a credit card. I tell her I think about the card, and I ask for a pen. To my surprise, she opens up a drawer in the kiosk and pulls out a box of orphaned pens for me to choose from. I take a yellow pen with a pocket clip and an advertisement printed on its side for the Brookstone Ranch in New Braunfels, Texas, and a phone number, 830-624-7554. Back at my seat, the woman with the immaculate hair sleeps on, and I sit down with my notebook, and I wonder about the Brookstone Ranch and how a pen from New Braunfels, Texas, ends up in the kiosk at the Las Vegas airport in an old box full of misplaced pens. I wonder who brought it there and whether they were in Las Vegas for business or pleasure, whether Vegas was worth it or not, what Braunfels means, and who might be on the other end of that phone line. So I pull up my cell phone, and I dial the number. It's now close to 8 o'clock in the morning, Texas time on a Sunday. The phone rings, and I rehearse what I might say to whomever answers the phone, and this appears in italics. Hi, my name's Joey, and I'm a writer, and I just found a pen advertising your ranch, and I'm sitting in the Las Vegas airport terminal surrounded by complete strangers who are perfectly content to stare at their magazines or sleep on their palms or type away their computers and smartphones, and it's got me thinking about the bubbles we walk around in, so I'm calling to get out of my bubble. I know it's really early in the morning on a Sunday, and I know chances are pretty slim that anyone would ever pick up, but here you are, and we're talking, so maybe could you just tell me a little bit about your ranch operation? Whether you specialize in cattle, or tourists, or both? And what does Braunfels mean? And do you have any children? And when was the last time you spoke with them? And did you think when you were young, say about 33, that you would miss them as much as you do now? And how are you? I mean, really, because I hate that question and the way I throw it around with people and the way I answer fine and great and wonderful, when really sometimes it's not fine, great, or wonderful. Sometimes I want to say life sucks, that my wife doesn't appreciate me, that my kids won't stop pinching one another, that my left elbow keeps flaring up so I can't lean on it. But I hate that kind of answer too, with its self-indulgent woe is me mentality. I mean, who am I to complain, right? Hello? The phone rings and rings and rings, and finally I hang up. Nobody answered. Sunday morning on a ranch, everyone must be asleep. asleep like the woman beside me with the impossibly perfect hair. I put away my phone, and I'll find out later that New Braunfels Stone Ranch is actually like a quarry where they sell landscaping stone, not a ranch with cattle or tourists. I put away my phone, and the woman begins to stir in her seat. She looks at me and smiles and says, would you make sure I'm awake if they start to board? And she gestures to the ticket counter. Sure, I say, and she puts her head back on her bag and she slips back into sleep. And I put away my phone, delighted to have an assignment. The waiting area has grown quite full by now, and my sleeping charge and I are almost completely surrounded by other travelers. Across from me sits an elderly man in khaki slacks and a loud plaid shirt. He hides behind a copy of the Las Vegas Review-Journal. To my left, an Indian couple eats breakfast out of bags from McDonald's. The man is in blue jeans and a polo, and the woman wears a maroon sari and a tilaka mark on her forehead. A few feet from me stands a man wearing oversized jean shorts and tight braids in his hair. He wears a pair of large headphones designed so the speakers look like hamburgers on either side of his head, and it says nom, 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 nom across the top. He appears lost in his music, the rest of the world canceled out by his noise-canceling headphones. The call of the boarding rings out over the intercom, and everyone begins to mobilize. The Indian couple crumples their McDonald's bag and discards it. The old man in the khaki shorts folds his paper and slides it into a zippered pocket of his suitcase. The man with the headphones pulls his bag off the ground and begins to gathering himself to line up. I double-check my passport, my wallet, and my water bottle and stand up to get in line at the gate, completely forgetting my wake-me-up assignment from the woman with the perfect hair. I leave her asleep in her seat, and by the time I realize my mistake, I'm already moving forward in line, boarding pass in hand. And when I look back at the sitting area, she's gone, swallowed up by the crowd. At least, I tell myself, she won't miss her flight. Buckling into my seat as the other passengers board the plane, I keep an eye out for the woman with the perfect hair, half hoping for a chance to maybe apologize and hoping to avoid maybe another meeting. But she never makes it down to my end of the aircraft. Instead, the plane slowly fills until a few seats remain, including one at my side and one in the row behind me. Two college-age girls, obviously friends and obviously wanting to sit by one another, stand in the aisle in front of me, looking puzzled as they stare at the two separated empty seats. And then they look at me. Giving up my seat for these two girls puts me one row back between a quiet Asian woman in black tights and an excessively tan 30-something man wearing plaid shorts and long-sleeved t-shirt. Both of them are engrossed in their phones when I pardon myself and take my seat between them. The man says hello, and the woman nods her head. Then they both return to their phones. I slide my bag under the seat in front of me and then look at my left and to my right, sizing up my seatmates. The Asian woman, with her shoulders turned in and her head bent over her phone, her long black hair hanging over either side of her face, she might as well be the Great Wall of China. So I turn to the excessively tan man and ask him whether he's heading out or heading home. Home, he says, and then offers an enthusiastic appraisal of the Las Vegas nightlife and the bachelor party he attended the night before. It was everything a bachelor party is supposed to be, he says, with what I think is a knowing smile, the kind that might have accompanied raised eyebrows and a wink if the man were, say, a 15-year-old boy. But since I've had as much experience at bachelor parties as your average 15-year-old boy, I use the few sitcom references I can recall and conjure an image of the stranger in the back room of some bar surrounded by awkward men holding beers while they watch a bikini-clad stripper strut circles around their soon-to-be-married friend. The man doesn't elaborate, however, except to say something about the whole night being a little foggy and to repeat his affection for the city. He asks about me in polite, disinterested way that air travelers are wont to do, and I tell him I'm an English teacher. Oh, he says, in in a way that I know means I just killed whatever buzz had been lingering from the night before. And he puts on his headphones, and I look out the window with what could only be described as a measure of wistfulness mixed with a hangover. Oh, he looks out the window with a measure. What happens in Vegas? He looks out the window with what could only be measured as a measure of wistfulness mixed with a hangover and injected with a supersaturation of small talk. The plane soon takes off, and as we rise in the air, I notice that the Asian woman beside me has fallen asleep. Her head bobs with the motion of the plane, and her phone has started slipping through her fingers. And when it finally falls out of her hand, she jerks awake and looks around briefly, as if hoping no one has seen her, and then she puts her phone away and settles back into her nap. With no one to talk to, I pull out my laptop to get a little work done. doing my best to honor the unspoken etiquette of airplane personal space. I keep my elbows tucked in at my side and my knees together. I give up as much of both armrests as I can, direct my air vent away from my neighbors, and keep my light off. As I type, though, I notice in my peripheral vision that the Asian woman's black hair is drawing closer and closer to my own head. In her exhaustion, she is leaning unconsciously towards me, like this. I lower my shoulder, like this, to give her room to lean, and after a few moments with her head pitched awkwardly in my direction, she bolts upright, glancing at me out of the corner of her eye, searching, I imagine, for any sign of how far she's been leaning over. I keep typing, pretending not to notice her bewildered look, and after a few seconds, she's bobbing again, her head slipping down toward me and then back up, never quite aloft and never quite fallen over. And she keeps on bobbing like this for several minutes. And I keep dropping my shoulder lower and lower to save her for the embarrassment of making contact. And we fly on like this for a good half hour. She leaning and I slouching, doing my best to preserve the space between us without waking her up. And it's really painful at this point because I am sitting, airplane seats, right? I got my inner dialogue during this awkward dance between her nodding, unconscious head and my slouching, self-conscious shoulder goes something like this. She's ridiculous. She's probably exhausted, probably hungover. I had to wake her up. I hate to wake her up. If she could see us, she'd be mortified. What am I supposed to do, jab her in the ribs? My back is getting sore. She could rest on my shoulder. What if she gets the wrong idea? What if I have to slouch like this for another hour? I'll forget it. I ease myself up ever so slowly and let her head come in for a landing on my shoulder. She doesn't move at first, but then she adjusts her head slightly as if unconsciously accepting the gesture. And I try to hold still and let her sleep. I sit and watch the plane's cabin in front of me, only the back of the heads visible above the blue leather seats, little bumps like braille I can't read, or perhaps like prairie dog mounds, small signs of life that suggest an entire world beneath the surface. Our heads bob in concert with the light turbulence vibrating through the aircraft, and it occurs to me that my own head, seen from behind, appears just as anonymous to the people sitting behind me. Soon, flight attendants will rise and walk down the aisle, collecting orders for small plastic cups of juice, soda, or coffee. And the pilot will turn off the seatbelt sign, and the lines will begin to form at the restrooms, and some of us will read or sleep or chat with their neighbors. In approximately 30 minutes, an exhausted Asian woman will wake up, realize she's been sleeping on my shoulder for who knows how long, and she will not be able to make eye contact or acknowledge me in any way for the rest of the flight. When we land, she will hurry to the exit without looking back, and I will never see her again. But right now, in the early hum of this short flight, I will keep still, she will sleep soundly, and the two of us will, for just a moment, be a little more than strangers. Thank you. And every part of that story is true, every last bit of it. I was really hoping somebody would answer when I called the Stone Ranch, but then when I found out it was just a landscaping place, I was obviously that Sunday no one was going to be there. So now I'm going to read another short essay, and this one is about, I said, male pattern baldness in my family, which I just love. You need something to help you stand out in a crowd. Or when bright lights are shining on you from behind. And it's called My Hairpiece. Get it? I was so happy with that title. Like, wait for it. Yeah, okay, now you got it, right? Because it's like my hair piece, like my piece, and then it's, yeah. If I have to explain it, maybe it's not that good. All right. So, and I have to tell you, I wish my brother Jason was here because this is really all about him. And he has this incredible coif of hair that you will hear all about in this essay. And it loomed in my house the way I imagine, like if your dad was a hunter and he'd killed some exotic animal in Africa, and that was just in the house all the time, and you just couldn't avoid it, and people would come over and they'd look at that. That's how my brother's hair was. It was just this giant monolithic thing in my household because I knew that this is what my future was, and this essay is about sort of coming to grips with that future. Okay, so here we go. My brother Jason and I stood shirtless in front of the bathroom mirror together, squeezing zits, counting our own zits, not each other's, counting chest hairs, and pulling faces to make each other laugh. I was 13 and he was 16, and the difference showed in our biceps, on our chins, and in the way we fixed our hair. If I combed mine in the morning, it mopped out by lunch. But if you've seen my brother's son, Ian, we have very similar hair. Even at dinner, Jason's held strong, a coiffure of teenage brilliance, born from the teeth of a ping-pong paddle-sized brush, and held in place by half a can of Mom's Aquanet. A metrosexual before his time, Jason treated his hair as some musicians treat their instruments, with an artist's careful hand and a lover's gentle touch. I wish he was here. He wanted to, never mind. At night, in front of the mirror in our bedroom, he loosened up a bit. We ratted our fingers through our hair, we brushed it out wildly, we cocked our jaws at odd angles, and stretched the tendons in our necks like this. You ever do that in front of the mirror? I did it all the time. We shrugged our shoulders to our ears and flared our nostrils. Our growing bodies were forever novel, and every day we found a new gesture or contortion that left us giddy, amazed at the absurdity of our changing flesh, curled over in laughter at our own gangly pubescence. We eventually washed our faces and said goodnight, but I often stayed behind and continued picking, flexing, and imagining, as if I could will myself a little taller, a little stronger, a little hairier in the right places. Our contortions were funny, but something about them stung, especially the goofy hair. I wetted mine down and parted it on one side and then the other, then down the middle. I even spiked it with gel, but nothing seemed to work. I leaned in close and stared at the skin on my face, wondering when stubble would finally begin to grow. And Jason was already shaving, and I'd noticed sideburns slowly creeping down his cheeks. I squinted and then lifted my eyebrows. I puffed out my cheeks to feel the skin stretch around my jaw, furrowed my brow, and opened my mouth wide. Then I pulled my hair back to examine the real problem. I'd been suspecting it for a while, eyeing my forehead warily during these solo sessions in front of the bathroom mirror. I stared at the fearful front line of wispy hair whose retreat had already rendered my oldest brother, my father, all my uncles, and both my grandfathers as bald as bass drums. Was this the forehead they saw in the mirror at 13, I wondered? I told myself that my hair was thicker, hardier, more like Jason's. It was a delusion that sounded good to me, and so I let it play. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew fate had pulled reality from its traveling case, looped the strap around his neck, and begun tuning the strings. And yet the sound of that swan song was so far off that I convinced myself I couldn't really hear it. By the time I turned 15, I could no longer pretend, not with the mounting hair in my comb, in my hat, and on my morning pillow. Still, I resisted. I counted hairs and looked up statistics on average daily shedding. I scanned old photographs to compare hairlines past and present. I looked up the definition of widow's peak and convinced myself, yeah, maybe that I've been worrying about nothing more than a genetically inherited point in my hairline. I tried marking the hairline with Mom's eyeliner to gauge any loss over time. I actually did this, but I couldn't draw a line faint enough to go unnoticed without it washing off in the shower. I stopped wearing baseball hats just in case. I combed my hair every night before bed because I heard that combing stimulated roots. I seriously contemplated Rogaine and watched Hair Club for Men commercials with embarrassing earnestness. I feared losing my hair like a sheep might fear castration if it knew what to look for the farmer and his pliers. Just let that soak in. Like beer gut and back hair, balding was, I'd convinced myself, a death knell for male sex appeal, an emasculating inevitability tolling in my ears. His junior year of high school, Jason grew full-blown sideburns and started learning the harmonica so he could play backup for his friend's garage band. He bought himself a few harps, black and silver Lee Oscars, keyed in C, D, and E, and he sat in his room with the door closed and listened to a cassette called Harpin' It Easy. From outside his room, I could hear the click and smack of spit and dry lips as he mimicked the instructor playing different licks. He learned to draw and blow and eventually to curl his tongue back into his mouth and bend notes. And over time, his sideburns grew and curled into handlebars on the side of his cheeks, and his hair turned wild and thick. And he started wearing long johns and under his T-shirts, and he brought a pair of Vans and some hemp jewelry. He started listening to bands like Led Zeppelin and Counting Crows and began playing music of his own, deep and guttural blues and rock recorded on his friend's secondhand 4-track. Music seemed a hair tonic for my brother, so I decided to learn the harmonica too. Jason gave me an old dented Lee Oscar and let me borrow Harpin' It Easy, and it should have been easy, I imagined. What are the blues, after all, if not a channel for loss? My anxiety about balding It may not have been enough to launch a career, but it ought to at least have helped me coax out a few good riffs. Jason's voluminous hair and immutable sideburns loomed large in my mind during those few first attempts at 12-bar blues. I learned to hear the rolling rhythm, to curl and bend the notes, but I couldn't quite master the sound. I picked up some albums from the record store to study, and I even looked for help in a book titled Harmonica for the Musically Hopeless. I eventually learned to play Oh Susanna and a few other folk songs, but the blues were as hard coming as the pepper flakes of hair dusting my cheeks, the slight hint of sideburns that were never quite there enough to do much more than make my face look dirty. Still, I learned to recognize the gravelly coolness of Muddy Waters and B.B. King, of Jimmy Rogers and John Lee Hooker, and though I got lost trying to play along with songs like Boom Boom and Lucille, I found comfort in the call and repeat of the refrains. All that melancholy and doubt packaged up as confidence. Or was it the other way around? I couldn't really tell, but at that point in my brother's shadow, it didn't really matter. During the fall of my senior year in high school, I made a trip to Supercuts that removed all doubt about my receding hairline. Lucy, the sprightly stylist who attended me, stood just a hair over 5 feet tall and spoke with an ambiguous East Asian accent. I didn't think that was going to be the connector between these two essays, small Asian women. Her hair, an immaculate tangle of sculpting products and bobby pins, hung around her face like scaffolding. Razor blade eyebrows darted across her forehead, leaving streaks of blue eyeshadow in their wake, and her high cheekbones glowed with bullseyes of red rouge. I'm getting my senior pictures taken next week, I told her, and I figure I ought to see a professional. Lucy smiled through shimmering red lipstick and tied a black cape around my neck, saying something like, "We make you look handsome, very handsome." Apparently pleased that I considered her and Supercuts professional. Lucy refused to use the electric clippers, scoffing at them in the holster on the counter as if they were training wheels or the sheet music she'd long since memorized. Instead, she pulled out a thin pair of scissors and began to work her way around my head, pulling my hair tightly between her fingers as she cut. Then she pulled out another pair of scissors, bladed with steel comb teeth, and then another comb, yet another pair of scissors. She moved with preternatural, syncopated rhythm, her scissors slowing down and speeding up, rising and falling as she turned a slow circle around my head. We were engrossed, she in her work and I in the blur of her hands and the snip clink of cut and comb. She returned her first set of scissors, but this time she guided her cut with a large arced comb, pulling it from my forehead straight back to the base of my neck, a slow, methodical coda, checking for symmetry, balance, and taper. And just when I thought she'd finished, she reached inside her drawer once more and pulled out a small electric beard trimmer, her finale. "Almost done," she said, and she began to clean up all my edges. She zipped and nipped every out-of-place hair she could find, and then she stopped on my forehead, furrowed her brow, and said, "You are too young to have widow's peak." And without hesitating or asking for my permission, she shaved my hairline even. I'd like to say this was a horrifying moment, an existential crisis that forced me to accept my own mortality. But instead of feeling anxious about my hair and angry about Lucy's barbershop bravado, I felt something akin to liberation. Up to that point, I'd been looking in the mirror, trying to see Jason in my own reflection. And now, thanks to Lucy, for the first time, the mirror gave me someone else to look at. Someone who could buy a pair of clippers and maybe cut his own hair in his own bathroom. Someone who could stop worrying about all that hair in the shower. Who could give up trying so hard to be someone he was not. I felt strange. I felt a strange fledgling confidence, all packaged up in uncertainty and apprehension. Or was it the other way around? I couldn't tell, but at that point, with my newfound reflection looking back at me in the mirror, it didn't really matter. This liberation lasted only a few weeks. Shortly after the Supercuts incident, everyone began to take notice. At 19, just before leaving on a mission trip to Japan for 2 years, my friend Kevin asked me, "So, do you think you'll have any hair when you get back?" It got worse once I arrived in Japan. When people guessed my age, they almost always said 30 or 5 or 40. One woman actually, said 30 or 35. One woman actually said 40. During the New Year's holiday, instead of saying Akemashite omedetou, which means Happy New Year, they say Hagemashite omedetou, which means congratulations, you're going bald. Just before, my companion, every day, he loved it. Just before returning to the United States, another friend gave me this warning: you should find a wife real quick when you get home, before she finds out you're balding. And back in the States, when I met my wife, her teenage sister told her, "I don't think I could ever marry someone who was losing hair like that." Somehow, coming to terms with my own baldness gave permission for the rest of the world to acknowledge it as well. Yet, if I ever acknowledged my own hair loss, people would say, "Oh, what? You're not losing that much hair." Or, I can't even tell, as if conspiring in denial somehow made it okay. I felt obliged to lean over and remove all doubt. Pretended or otherwise. By then, the back of my head had thinned so much that from the distance it looked like I was wearing a skull cap. "Oh, well," people would say, "it could be worse." Of course it could, I wanted to say, but all I could manage to conjure were a few of my father's bald jokes. "I didn't go bald, my hair just migrated south," I might say. Or, "Sure, I'm going bald because brains and hair don't grow well together." Or perhaps my favorite, "The only bad part about going bald is not knowing when to stop washing your face." My dad will appreciate your laughter because he's in the back. And I've heard these jokes so many times. But he'll be glad to know the material's still working. Of course, I preface these jokes with the disclaimer, my dad always said, as if that granted me permission to repeat lame jokes with social impunity, as if invoking my father could somehow veil my own clamor for pity. Today, my brother Jason, still taller and hairier than I am, and showing no signs of slowing down, has begun experimenting with his hair, a la David Beckham and Colin Farrell. He still has the same ping-pong paddle brush, but between girlfriends and professional stylists, he's learned to use a variety of specialty shampoos, working waxes, defining pastes, and styling gels. Striving towards some fashion magnum opus that I will never understand, he sculpts and plays his hair to the point that I sometimes don't recognize him at first glance. He's moved on from harmonica-playing high school grunge god to business-traveling sales professional. And this is true. The number of co-workers and bank tellers, male and female, who frequently hit on him stands as a testament to the dizzying heights of his fashion presence. I, meanwhile, still cut my hair in my bathroom with electric clippers and watch fewer and fewer strands fall into the sink each month. I haven't been to a barbershop in years, and one bottle of Suave lasts me months. Occasionally, when I lean over to tie my shoe or get something out of the bottom cupboard, my wife says in passing, "I almost forget you're even going bald until you bend over like that." My son Callan pats me on the head and says, "Dad, where'd your hair go?" And on occasion, I still pick up the harmonica, take a deep breath, and let loose the few clunky licks that I haven't forgotten. Nowadays, though, with my harp to my lips, I don't feel like I'm bending and reaching for the same impossible coolness I once was. But the notes still bend and my lips still smack, and if I let it, the music still conjures in me a slack-shouldered confidence and an unshakable blues, a contradiction that I've begun to realize is no contradiction at all. One day recently at Jason's house, we found ourselves in front of the bathroom mirror with our boys brushing teeth and doing hair, getting ready to go out. Jason was piling a waxy goop in his hands and running it through his son's hair, giving it spikes here and there. Callan, who's my oldest son, stood beside him, his cousin, hopping on one foot in anticipation. He was doing this, just like that. I'd just given Jason a green light to spike Callan's blonde mop into something presentable. With both hands full of goop and hair, Jason turned to me and said, "If you would grow your hair out," and he paused for dramatic effect, "we could have some real fun with it." "I don't think so," I said, and I sensed some pity on his face as he continued working gel into my son's hair. But I don't think he understood. I'm not interested in my hair being anything more than a confession of reality, a talisman against delusion, a bluesy refrain. Less, I got my mojo working, and more, the thrill is gone. We finished grooming our boys and followed them out of the bathroom, their spiky heads bobbing in front of us, and my son shouted something about cool hair and Uncle Jason. And I patted him on the shoulder, and I thought to myself, enjoy it while it lasts, kid. Enjoy it while it lasts. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you all for laughing. That's so nice. Megan. No. So the question was, did I make the phone call to the New Braunfels, Texas, New Stone Ranch or whatever it was, with the essay in mind? And I think there's the two answers to that question are yes and no, because when you're writing essays, you're always thinking about essays. You're always thinking, and it kind of makes family time difficult because I'll run off and have to write something down, and Melissa's like, "What are you doing?" And I got to write this down, or she'll have to say, "You can't put that in an essay." So I think in the moment I was really intrigued by the odd place, social place that a airport is, and I was just trying to break out of my mundane airport experience. But I was thinking about writing because I was looking for a pen and I was taking notes, and I was in the middle of finishing a dissertation, so you're always thinking about writing. So yes and no. I mean, I figure if you're doing it because you want to write about it and it means you're making your life richer, then that's not too sad a thing to do it for, right? I mean, you do it for the glory of the story, and if you end up happy at the end, then why not? Other questions?
What strikes me about your essays is that they're really, really honest. Is it hard for you to be that honest about things sometimes?
If I said yes, would you believe me? Is it hard to be honest? That's the question. I think it's hard to know what part of the truth to tell. When you're upset about something, it's easy to tell the part of the truth that you're upset, right? And I find that essays always start for me with something that I can't let go of, some moment, some experience that I can't shake. And so I have to write about it. And knowing what the honest truth in that essay doesn't usually happen until later on in the act of writing it. So I think it's hard to write all the way to the honesty that matters. It's easy to be honest about your initial emotions, but it's much harder to stick with those initial emotions, to analyze the heck out of them and see what truth emerges post-writing or in the writing itself. Kyle.
So I've probably asked you before, but you have this really good knack for balancing humor and, I don't want to say serious, but like the significance of what you're talking about, emotional things. How do you find that? How do you know when you haven't gone too far? It's not, also too light, or you strike it really well.
That's a really good question. I'm listening to one of David Sedaris' books right now as I drive around, and it's written in his I'm wealthy and I live in France and I fly first class everywhere I go stage of life, which is, I think, more difficult place to find humor in than in the I'm a starving postgraduate dressed up as a elf in New York City. And so in this later piece, right, like I think it's easier to find the humor in that than in the like, oh, flying first class was so difficult because this guy next to me was crying. He has an essay about this man next to him crying in first class. And you just can't think, but Sedaris, you're flying first class, man. So I think that part of the challenge of humor, and I haven't figured it out, I still struggle. I brought these two essays to read today, convinced it would just be crickets the whole time. Just absolutely afraid to death that you wouldn't find it funny. So again, thank you for laughing. But I think part of it's not taking yourself so seriously, and looking for the quirky details that you can exploit. But I think that to finish the David Sedaris point, in his newer book that I'm reading, sometimes it's like he's trying too hard. Like the jokes fall a little flat because the joke is the point as opposed to the idea. And so maybe that's the way to strike the balance. Always have the idea be the point, and the jokes will. If it's a funny thing, then the jokes will take care of themselves. In the back, Brother Cutchins, is that you? That's a challenge because I read something that an author writes and I think, oh, this is mildly funny, but then I see them read it and it's often much funnier in person. And so I'm not sure I know the answer to that. You can do things with hard line breaks, with pauses, with You can play with your syntax in a way that emphasizes certain things. All of those are ways of doing it, but I don't have I don't think there's an easy way to do that. I could just be there every time you're reading the book, and I could make the face. I don't know. Yeah, it's terrible. Yes.
I sort of have a two-parter question.
Okay.
I hope I can express clearly. So you talked about your ideas usually come from a moment you can't let go of. So is that how that's how your essays typically start? Yes. And how do you take that moment and make it something into an essay that feels like your essays, like it's not that they try to fit into or anything, but they feel complete, they feel whole. And how do you take that one moment and make it feel that way? If that makes sense.
Sure. That's a good question. The question is, how do you start from an idea or a question or an emotion or a moment that won't let go of you, and how do you turn that into a polished essay, right? The Karl Kloss calls it artful artlessness, that the essay seems to just spill out of the writer's mind, but in fact, it's hours and hours and hours and pages and pages and pages of revision. I cut up my essays a lot and moved them around the table to see how they fit together, but I think every writer begins writing for themselves. I'm putting this down on the paper, or you should. If you begin writing for somebody else, you're writing advertising. But if you begin writing for yourself, then you'll stay true to the emotional heart of whatever you're writing about. But eventually, once you have explored your subject a ton, then you begin to say, who cares, right? Who's the audience, and why are they going to want to read this? And then you begin to shape and to cut and to create a narrative arc. Let's see if I can think of something from like the hairpiece thing. It began with that scene. Really, the first fragment is the first one I wrote with me and Jason standing in front of the mirror, and we discovered a long time ago that we look a lot alike, but his nostrils are crooked. And as a younger brother who was just always going bald, and I was shorter and not as strong, and having crooked nostrils was like, yes, because mine are really symmetrical. If we could talk later, just check them out. But it started with that idea that I was self-conscious about my hair, and then all the music stuff about blues and all those images came later, after I started shaping the piece and wanting to find a way to, how do I make this more than just about my sort of my pity party about going bald, and the music elements and the images were a later embellishment. Even the blues harmonica conversation, all that, I realized, I could talk a little bit more about, I can use the blues harmonica as a way to talk about my self-consciousness, the way to talk about my balding. So the desire to layer and to develop thematic complexity comes from no longer writing just for yourself, but writing for an audience. Was that your whole question? You said you had two. Okay, that's okay, good.
So,
It's my father-in-law, Mike Fitzgerald, everyone.
Dr. Franklin,
Yes.
when looking at the personal essay, it seems to be rising in the chart, so to speak. And I'm just curious where you've seen it come from maybe 10, 15 years ago, and where it's going to go in the next 10 or 15.
So the question is about the rise of the personal essay in the past 15 years, and why it's risen maybe and where it's going. I remember not 15 years ago, but about 10 years ago, I was walking on campus with Pat Madden, and we were talking about how you take a bunch of essays and make them into a book. And he said, one of the things he said is the conventional wisdom 10 years ago was that you just can't do that. No one wants to read a collection of essays, because the word essay implies freshman composition and high school English class, and it's not a word. We want to read stories, we want to read memoirs. And so if you wanted to publish something like this, and even the back of mine says memoir/literary nonfiction, and that's a marketing term because they're scared to death still of the word essay. But there's something about reality that we were just talking with this yesterday with some students about how when something absolutely nuts happens to you, tell somebody about it. Part of the satisfaction of that story is that it actually happened, right? Those same details of a woman falling asleep on my shoulder in an airplane might not be that great a story, but because it actually happened, it creates this sort of visceral sense of connection between the text and the reader, right? Like you think, oh wow, I can't believe that actually happened to somebody. That's why we get so frustrated when we find out things are falsified in memoirs. When things are we find out they're not true. We feel cheated, right? We feel upset. We feel like, or can you imagine someone got up at a general conference and told this happened, right? Decades ago. I don't remember his name. Thank you. If someone got up and told a story that we thought was true and we felt, yeah, man, God's good and life is wonderful, and then we found out it wasn't true, we'd kind of be sick to our stomach, right? So I think there's something about truth that we love, and something about trying to figure out what it means to be human, and what it means to navigate everyday life, and that's what the essay helps us do. I think certainly blogs have helped increase people's willingness and desire and ability to share their personal thoughts, though most blogs are just terrible, including my own. It's just vapid family photos of my boys playing baseball and my cute dog that's really, really cute. Really cute. But that doesn't matter, right? My dog's name is Virginia Wolf. But we just call her Ginny. Yeah. And we have a crate, and we want to get a little sign that says a crate of one's own on it. But then that seems like maybe too much, because I really admire Virginia Woolf, and to name my dog after her seems somehow sacrilegious. But my mom has a dog named Joe, that's my name. My mom named her anyway. So yeah, it's 10 till. If there's maybe one more question, otherwise let's go get a brownie. Tessa, can you meet my dad? He just went out. I think he was offended, and so he's like, "I'm out of here." No, I think my dad recovered from open heart surgery about 2 months ago, and is in a wheelchair most of the time, and is now living with us, and is great fun. And so I don't know if he's leaving because he's tired and kind of ill, but if he's around, he's the guy in the wheelchair with the Navy hat, and he has some awesome jokes you should ask him about, the balding ones in particular. So, but he's here if you want to. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Appreciate it.